I think I might have done a couple of videos on mapping the MPE to Skydust. I can't remember. I don't know if I've published them. I post a lot of rubbish on my channel, Mark. So I'll see if I can find it.
Great. Yeah. No. Send me if you have one on that specifically. Because
just me. The only reason I do it is if I don't publish it, I'll forget and I'll probably delete the project that it was done in.
Totally.
I thought if I just put it on YouTube, I've got it there. It's all on the screen. I know how to rebuild that if I ever need to come back to it. So that's why I do it.
Welcome everybody to a December episode of Spatial Audio Monthly, our monthly podcast where we talk about all things immersive media and immersive audio in particular. My name is Michael Wagner. I'm hosting this podcast, and next to me is Sam Hawking, my co-host.
Hello.
Hello, Sam.
Hello.
And we have a very, very interesting guest today, Mark Slee from Envelop for Life. And actually, he is partly responsible for why this podcast exists. And I'm going to talk about it in a second. But Mark, do you want to say something about yourself? What you do and who you are?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name's Mark Slee. I'm a software engineer, artist, musician, DJ, bit of a mix of things. But primarily, as you mentioned, in this context, the lead developer of Envelop for Life. I also work on some spatial visualization software for LEDs that goes by the name of LX Studio or Chromatic. My background is technical, computer science and math, but have throughout my life always been DJing, producing electronic music in parallel. So really enjoy just sort of bouncing between those two roles, creating tools, and then going having a good time using them.
Cool, and we're going to talk about Envelop for Life a little bit later today, but before we do that, let's first kind of talk a little bit about what happened over the last month. And Mark, you're very welcome to join in at any moment in time if you want to. Before we do that though, I need to kind of make one announcement. We selected the winners of the giveaway that we had last month, the giveaway for the Audio Brewers Phaser plugin. Now, if you have not, the way I have to do that, unfortunately, because our podcast channel is not yet monetized, so I couldn't reach out to you personally. So the way I did that is I left comments or responses to your comments in the podcast. So if you go to that episode and you look at your comment and you see me responding to that comment on how to reach out, please reach out to me, and in order to collect your license. Not everybody has done that yet. But it was kind of quite fun. We had a lot of really interesting kind of responses, wouldn't you say?
Yep, some very interesting responses. Some that didn't read the criteria correctly, though. So they weren't included by me, but they might have been by you. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you needed to follow the rules.
You got to follow the rules, guys. Come on. No, all good. I'm sure. Lots are very happy.
Yeah. So once again, if you haven't kind of reached out to me yet, please do so. It's very easy, and then I'm going to kind of send you the license. With that out of the way, what were the news, Sam? Any news that we had this month?
Not a huge amount. There was the new Altiverb release, wasn't there? With now for multi-channel support. So that's kind of following on from like Vienna month previous with the GPU audio.
I usually complain about the price of those things because that kind of costs $900, right?
It's what I call post-production dollars, not
post-production dollars,
not music production dollars, or certainly not home music production dollars. Anyway,
it's kind of funny, kind of. I keep mentioning that because it kind of bothers me, and kind of I do understand, kind of these are old, kind of established tools that people use in the post-production community, and their kind of money is usually not that big of a deal. If you're doing big productions, you want to have quality. Yeah. And these are kind of well-established tools that people have for a long time. But what really always surprises me is how they defend, kind of, they're very passionate about that, and kind of they defend, no, that's perfectly fine. That's kind of a tool that's supposed to cost like $900.
Yeah, I think they, for that price, I think they probably, well, it's only my impression, I've got no evidence for it, but I think the engineers probably get quite a tight relationship with the development of it as well. It always seems to be very tied into this engineer's already talking about it or promoting it and stuff like that. So I think it's quite tightly, the whole industry is quite tight in that sort of side of it. But yeah, no, the price is definitely a factor in deciding whether to use it. I mean, it is a very, very good convolution.
Yeah, no question about that.
Like Reverb, probably one of the best. I was kind of waiting always thought Valhalla would release something by now, given how popular that.
They haven't done new stuff for a while.
I don't think any of their stuff is multi-channel yet. No, so that would be quite cool to see, because it's certainly got a certain, in terms of how many people use it. So a lot more people use something like Valhalla, Reverbs than Liquid Sonics or anybody else really. So I think that'd be quite cool.
I'm actually going to come back to Valhalla a little later in the podcast when we talk about Envelop for Life, because the one thing that I like about Valhalla, actually I just reinstalled my Valhalla reverbs primarily because there are a couple of developers coming out with this Max for Life wrappers now, so you can actually use that reverb in Ableton, and it looks like an Ableton device. So that kind of made me reinstall all Valhalla reverbs, because it's really convenient to have that like right there. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. No, I mean that's I love anything like that where you can kind of redesign or reimagine sort of how to use a plugin, so like wrappers and stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's just more fun.
Yeah.
There's really not been a lot else in terms of tools, I don't think, this month. You might be aware of a couple of others. The only other thing I've heard is there were some updates on the kind of Dolby Access application on Windows.
Okay. Yeah, no, I haven't used it for a while.
Looks like it's going to get some not considerable updates in terms of anybody would notice, but some of the technology maybe. So, but I don't know much about that. It's obviously still beta.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we do know of a couple of releases that we expect for early next year, but we can't really talk about those. But for anybody who is listening, there are a couple of really interesting things coming over the next couple of weeks. I was actually hoping for one to be already published at that point. That's one that even Sam doesn't know, but unfortunately I can't talk about that. It's going to be an interesting one. There's actually one. Ben Supper actually reached out to me. You guys probably know that Supperware head tracker, and he told me that he made the quietest release, the most silent release ever. Yeah. Nobody knows about it. So if you have a kind of a Supperware head tracker,
I've got mine on here.
You might wanna go to the website and download the latest version, because there's actually a firmware upgrade waiting for you.
Yeah, I think there's been a GUI update as well.
It's a GUI update, and a couple of things. And I think now that people are actually using his head tracker for quite a lot of things. Especially. I think one thing that really gave it a boost is sort of the official support of Dolby, the Dolby renderer, right? So that's really the only head tracker right now that is supported by the Dolby Atmos renderer. That really, I think, gave him a boost. So he kind of updated it, and it looks very professional. Well, it always looked professional, but it is a significant under the hood update, I think.
Ben was he worked on with Rowley, the MPE keyboards, and I know Mark's keen to talk about how that can be integrated into spatial audio. So that'll be interesting. That'd be quite interesting, because I've been a Rowley synth user for a long time. Not really? Necessarily. Yeah. I'm pretty much first adopter of the Rowley MPE. It's not a particularly brilliant product in terms of stability and stuff, because it's quite advanced, I think, for its time. But for using it in ways that isn't necessarily just playing notes or expressions, it's pretty.
Weren't they sold to?
You can do some quite cool stuff with it.
Weren't Rowley sold to some kind of conglomerate or something? Oh, kind of to have this.
No, they had financial trouble, and probably it got wrapped up in some deal somewhere. So
So kind of that's always one of the things that gets people concerned, I think.
But I think that whole kind of using MPE as a way to control spatial audio is and synthesizers is something that's definitely interesting me. Anyway, I'm sure we're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So kind of the only other thing, there wasn't really much, and I think a lot of the reason for that is because we are in the season where everybody purchases stuff on the cheap. So you can't really do a lot of new releases during that time because everybody will ask you, oh, is there a discount? So kind of Black Friday. Did you guys buy anything on Black Friday?
I bought a VST audio player.
Oh.
I downloaded there wasn't a demo, so I downloaded the full release. This is basically a WAV file player that will play out a VST plugin, basically. Don't ask me why, but I needed one, and it was on offer. So I downloaded. There wasn't a demo, so great. I'm gonna have to. I'll download the full version because I just wanted to see if it can play multi-channel WAV files, because it didn't say it, but it looked like it might. And so I downloaded it, installed it into it's one of the standalone VST hosts, because it tells you what the channel capability of the plugin is, and it said 6, and I thought, oh, brilliant! I just want to play 5.1. That's enough. That'll work. So I bought it. I bought it, loaded in a 5.1 file. It showed the 5.1 file in its interface. Oh, brilliant! This is definitely going to work. Press play, and there's only two channels of audio coming out. I thought, oh, this maybe I need to enable the so I'm a Bitwig user, so I'll enable the multi outs on the plugin in the VST2 version, and there was no multi out option. So I basically, I blew some money on something that almost works but not quite. So that was my Friday adventure.
Yeah. Mark, anything that you picked up?
I managed to mostly resist this year. I just picked up a few percussion plugins. I'm going to get the name. It's a Swedish company, Clevgrand, I think.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Fun little tools. Just they have a few that do these kind of found sounds, kitchen objects, and shakers and things. So just sort of fun, organic production. Been messing around with that a bit.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I also kind of, and I'm with them a little kind of you sometimes purchase things that you in the end you don't really need. So I'm honestly not quite sure, but I bought the multi-channel upgrade to Sonarworks, which is the weirdest thing because I don't have a multi-channel setup. But I felt maybe at some point I have one, and then I already have the room correction going.
Excellent.
Black Friday. That's kind of that's an interesting one.
Kind of lasts nearly a month now, doesn't it? Black Friday.
I was going to say it's really hardly just Friday.
Black season.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen kind of the one thing that I really liked. Some companies are really having fun with that. And I don't know if you noticed that there's this one company who builds digital analog converters, primarily sheet audio. And essentially they had a Brown Wednesday.
Right. Excellent.
And I always felt that kind of the only company that can pull that off is sheet audio.
Yeah.
Love it.
Excellent. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, so once again, not much happened over the last couple of weeks, but that doesn't matter because we have a very interesting guest today, Mark Slee. And Mark Slee is big with Envelop for Life. And not everybody might be aware of what Envelop for Life really is. So my first question to Mark would be, what exactly is Envelop for Life?
Yeah, so Envelop for Live is a set of tools that runs on Max for Live within Ableton. That makes it easy to use Ableton as an environment to do ambisonics-based spatial panning and spatial music. So the suite includes basic panning devices, some convolution reverb, another couple utility reverbs, some kind of basic routing tools, and a few sort of effects. So it's kind of a sort of core, nothing super wacky, but basic sort of core package to have working with spatial audio feel natural within Ableton.
And I just realized that I pronounced it incorrectly. How did you pronounce? I always say
this is you're not the only one. We say envelop.
envelop. Okay, well, thank you.
To the verb to be enveloped
To envelop.
by sound.
Honestly, that makes a lot more sense.
Not an envelope in which one mails things, but yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
We knew from the start that was going to be a constant mispronunciation. It's quite all right.
So okay, well now I have to relearn. That's kind of the weird thing. You guys have been around for quite some time, I think, right?
Yeah, probably. I was trying to check because I couldn't remember. I think we're coming up on 10 years almost. I think we're not quite there, but I want to say the first software release was maybe around 2015, somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah, and that brings me to kind of what I said at the beginning, kind of why kind of what you do is actually kind of the reason why I am here. So a couple of years ago, I decided I needed something to do when I'm retiring, and I felt music production, and I purchased Ableton, and then essentially I came across Envelop for Life, and that got me really excited because as a mathematician, ambisonics is something that I could actually relate to. So Envelop really is the main reason that brought me into spatial audio, and that's something I'm really grateful for. So that's really cool. Now you guys
that's cool to hear that actually, because we're super grateful for all these videos you've made, and I think for a while you were making them, and I don't know if you had reached out to anyone on the team because I feel like I didn't know about them and then discovered them one day, and we were just we're like, oh wow, someone's making these really great.
I'm constantly saying that kind of I'm a little bit socially awkward, so I usually don't reach out to people. But I don't think I've ever reached out to anybody. No, I just make stuff.
Well, I'm glad you've done it now because they're extremely helpful videos, and some of the most, more comprehensive than any of the documentation we've done ourselves.
Really, well, thank you. Thank you. I sometimes look back at, especially at the old videos, and I'm kind of, it's kind of. I think that is always the case. If you do something for such a long time, then you look at the early stuff, and it looks a lot like cringe.
Yeah, that's the artist in you. I think every artist can relate. Yeah.
So, but one thing I think that makes your stuff really interesting is also you follow a particular philosophy. Essentially, kind of everything that you do is available for free to some extent, right? Is there? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Essentially, first of all, how came that to be, and how did you decide to make that available? And what was the reason why you kind of decided to go that route? Because there are a couple of other systems that actually charge sometimes a lot of money for these types of things, and your stuff is essentially free.
Yeah, I think so. Envelop for Live is the set of tools, E4L, and then there's the larger Envelop organization, which is a nonprofit organization started out of and still mostly based in San Francisco. So I think the whole sort of philosophy from the beginning was this nonprofit approach of just wanting to support spatial audio, make it more accessible, bring people together around shared listening experiences and the impact of that. And then so there's a few things that Envelop, the organization, does to kind of foster and enable that. So Envelop for Live is one piece of that, which is the tools. And a couple of reasons for open source. One was that we were using a lot of open source components, some of which I think may have been, I can't remember if they were GPL to begin with, which effectively forces you to also be GPL if you're going to use it.
That's true.
Some may have been, some may have not. But I think that resonated with us anyway, because I think part of the idea was to sort of try to be an alternative to the more established, either sort of Dolby cinema-oriented systems, or, as you were just talking about with plugins, I think the sort of high-end post-production market. We were sort of thinking, okay, there is definitely hobbyist interest in this, and just sort of culturally the different approach to it, which is, not big project post-production, but experimental electronic music. There's such a history of that in so many, the West Coast Synth School and all these other things that cut just that sort of ethos of messing around and seeing what happens. I think we were interested in sort of supporting that kind of just experimental approach to it. So it started open source. We've kept it open source since. Envelop then does also operate a venue in San Francisco where we have a multi-channel system and operate events. those are ticketed events and things like that. So E4L sort of fits in a larger overall Envelop project. But yeah, I think we would love to see it be easier for people to get into the content production funnel. There's always such a chicken and egg problem with spatial audio that there's just not enough content. And then there's always this question for artists, well, why should they invest in all these expensive tools and all the effort and time to produce this content if there's not a huge number of places to present it? So we're sort of trying to approach different sides of that sort of simultaneously, both through creating the listening spaces and trying to encourage pop-up events and that kind of thing, but then also, just making the content production easy.
And
am I right? So,
yeah, no,
sorry,
go ahead,
Michael.
Tim. Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, just something pops into my head because I was playing with, I think it's all off my memory now. I think it's called Plug Data, which is based on Pure Data. Is that what Envelop is developed on? Is it a Pure Data type thing, or am I?
No, well, it's Max. Yeah,
I mean, Max for Life is based on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the history of Max, as I understand. I'm not super expert in this, but I think that it basically for Pure Data and Max came from the same sort of academic birth, and then there was at some point a sort of Pure Data stayed in the purely sort of open source experimental realm, or Max became more of a
right. Okay.
So yeah, same essence. The guts is that we use the core ambisonics guts that we use is the ICST ambisonics externals package that's out of Swiss, and those are all open source. They released that, so that's what we use for the core guts of just the ambisonics encoding decoding.
Yeah.
We've played around with a few different I think the initial version used a different one, but there's a few good open source academic ambisonics implementations out there. One is the ICST package that we use, and then there's also a good the IEM suite out of I think it's Austrian. I forget exactly which.
As an Austrian, I can tell you it is Austrian. Yes.
Yes, it's Austrian. Those are very good tools as well. But I think they just do VST plugins. I'm not sure if it has a. I don't think there's a Max version.
No, not as far as I'm aware.
I'm curious about tell us a little bit more about your space that you have. You guys are located in San Francisco, right? So that's your primary. Are there any other locations, or is this the only location that you operate?
That is the only location, the only permanent location. There was briefly one in Salt Lake City that kind of developed out of a mobile system that's not operating anymore. And then we have the permanent location in San Francisco. That is a 32 channel system. It's a 28.4. You've probably seen images on the website. I'll describe it for those listening, but we kind of go with this approach of using these columns. Mm-hmm. So we have 8 columns forming an octagon that envelops the audience, shall we say. The columns are about 12 feet tall. So we have within each column, we have a head height speaker around 6 feet, and then we have a floor speaker pointing upwards, and then an overhead angled down from about 12 feet. That 8, the ring of 8 is kind of our core thing with all the systems we do. So our mobile pop-up system is just an octagon at head height with 8 speakers. But then in that permanent venue, we add an extra ring of sort of 4 overheads right up on the ceiling, plus subs. So that is a room that holds, our capacity is just around 50 people sort of max. So it's an intimate space, cozy room. And we do a mix there of different programming types. We do some live performance or DJ performance. We do some just listening events with pre-recorded, pre-spatialized material. Sometimes source material that was in surround, Pink Floyd album, that sort of thing. Other times upmixed content that we've translated. And then some events are more sort of sound bath, meditation session type of thing. Where a lot of field recordings, this kind of more sort of ambient soundscape. So a mix of experiences in there.
And that is meant to be used with the Envelop system only, or do you kind of also kind of support other spatial audio systems?
We pretty much, I mean, we're operating those events, so it's basically always we're running it off Envelop. In theory, I think we're not opposed to someone coming and doing something else. But most the events in there tends to be us operating them. So that's where we got
and
everything.
kind of is this a space where anybody can contribute, or kind of how does this work? Is this something that you
no,
yeah.
Not quite. It's part of a larger venue. We're sort of one room in a larger venue that includes a very large multi-thousand-person concert venue, and then they also have like a nightclub that I forget exact capacity, maybe 300, 500 type of people, and then they have this room. So the larger space does a whole mix of programming. So unfortunately, we don't have a huge amount of control over like overall scheduling. We would love to. At some point, be able to do more daytime programming and sort of educational stuff, studio sessions, that sort of thing. But yeah, no, we are. I mean, we do a mix of community events and things. So we have parties and concerts. Sometimes it'll be from other local collectives or producers doing things. It's hard to make the economics of sort of bringing people in from afar work with a 50-person venue. It's just can't bring enough people through the door. So it's mostly local stuff. But we would love to. Our sort of vision for the arc of it, the hope would be to kind of build a community around the sort of format and standard. And ideally, I think that's also part of the vision with the free software is that it would be great to get to a point where there's a venue of some sort like this in most major cities that could exchange content and how someone could produce something and present it and have there be either synchronized live event where it's presented simultaneously in multiple places, or just federated where, okay, I've produced this, I can go present it in 5 or 10 different venues in different cities rather than a one-off. Because I think, and that's part of why Ambisonics, because I think the sort of theoretical portability of it is useful there, where you haven't the artist has not produced something that is channel based for a very specific one-off venue that happens to have XYZ speaker layout. Our hope is that, of course, you always need to tune spatial audio for the room. Like when you go to it's not going to sound exactly the same in a different room with different speaker layout, but at least the hope is with Ambisonics, the distance to tune it to a new venue should be a lot lower.
Yeah. How's that normally played? Are they using kind of a live type setup, even in Ableton maybe, or is it kind of a pre-recorded?
Yeah, no, most of the time we are playing it out of Ableton using E4L in real time. So that's the majority. That's the common use case. We do in some of our Macs, we have a mechanism to just capture the output, of course, as a multi-channel wave if we just want to bake it. But typically it's run directly off E4L.
Oh, cool. Yeah, because that's always the challenge with like the processing and any latency, and what you're hearing isn't necessarily exactly what you're kind of seeing in front of you at that moment in time. Unless you're just playing it back passively. If you've got to interact with it in any way, once you're past that 20 or 30 milliseconds, it's quite difficult sometimes.
Totally. We separate, we use 2 different machines for this reason, which I will say now that in the years between with Apple Silicon and stuff, it's getting less and less necessary. But at the time, at the first time we separate E4L runs, encodes the Ambisonics, and we just send that out of sound card to a back-end machine that receives that and then does all the speaker decoding. It is amazing how fast this stuff develops. So 5-6 years ago, that was definitely necessary from a latency point of view to split the CPU load. Now it's often not really necessary, but it does just reduce. It's nice in that it just reduces risk. And then that lets us do some other things where we have that. For instance, if we have multiple people performing at a show, we can have that back-end machine just sort of fade out somebody's input, put on some field recording transition thing while somebody else switches their computer. It's helpful from a production workflow perspective as well.
Cool. Yeah, no, really cool.
Yeah, kind of you already touched a little bit and kind of why Ambisonics, and I don't know if you've seen like last month's episode when we had Alejandro Cabrera, and he said something that kind of stuck with me. He said that kind of Ambisonics is going to be around even if all the other spatial audio formats fold, because in essence, it's sort of really kind of, if you do the mathematician in me, then sort of you automatically arrive at ambisonics. So it's sort of the safe bet, right? So you can be sure that this lasts longer than any other spatial audio technology, right?
Yeah, and it's cool. It's so old already. It's crazy. I mean, it was invented in the 70s or something, such a long time ago, before any of these use cases for it were probably really even being thought about. But yeah, I think we like that about it philosophically as well. And yeah, it sort of can't go away in that sense because it's kind of, well, one, it's sort of just open and free. It's not really controlled by any company. And as you say, like it's sort of in principle just math. And I have found that amusing where anytime I've explained to like a physicist or someone how the system works with zero interest in music, and they'll just be, oh yeah, spherical harmonics, of course, yeah, we use that. Like that shows up in everything ever. And I was just like, oh really? Does it? I didn't.
Yeah,
I've always just thought of it as like, oh, this is the Fourier transform for a sphere.
Exactly.
Like I translate it into concepts I know. But yeah, physicists apparently.
Exactly. It's a mathematical necessity. It's a consequence of mathematics. It's sort of however you do that, you always arrive at the same spherical harmonics. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. The one place in some, we use third order ambisonics in E4L. So it's 16 channels of audio per sound object. Obviously, you can go way up as high as you want. I think the IEM stuff goes up to 7th if you want it. But that's the only place where I question sometimes for super crazy modern installations with crazy high speaker counts. Third order definitely becomes blurry between the speakers. There's not enough discrete information to say you're working with 100 speakers. So that's kind of the only use case where I start to wonder, oh, maybe it's not the best thing if you have an insane number of speakers. But then there's always just a lot of these things are, what are you trying to create? What experience are you going for? So, I mean,
have you ever thought about going higher orders? I mean, kind of the most plugins can do 7th order now, right? So and Pro Tools does 7th order, and kind of even Nuendo they didn't go up to 7th order, but they're at 4th order now. Have you ever thought about kind of higher orders?
Yeah, in theory, there's no reason we couldn't do it. I will say this is where being inside of Max for Live is not the best, and the fact we're sort of, I don't want to say abusing, but kind of like at the edge of the Max for Live API. I think, I would be really happy actually if Live just started natively supporting multi-channel buses, because a lot of the guts of E4L is this kind of ugly hack around that, where it's like you want it to just feel like it's a 16-channel bus. You don't want to think about routing additional channels. So we kind of, under the hood, when Max for Live devices have extra inputs or outputs, you can sort of programmatically route them. The API is actually sort of an API equivalent of those track routing dropdowns that every Ableton channel exposes in the UI. So you have this sort of, what E4L is doing under the hood is setting up loads of auxiliary inputs and outputs and programmatically flipping all these little routing dropdowns. So even me having built it, like I don't love it. It's the kind of thing that makes me nervous as a software engineer, because I'm just like, this is a bit fiddly. It is a valid use of the API, but sort of clearly not what it was probably designed for.
Yeah.
And so that's where also, tacking on going up to like 7th order and turning that into 64 channels of that per. I sort of look at it, and the software engineer in me wonders, ooh, I'm like abusing this API for stereo pairs. Doing this thing a ton of times with loads of stereo pairs is probably not. No one implementing a DAW from scratch or for native support would implement it that way. It would be done in a clean way that understands a chain of. I think that's where it's and who knows? I mean, I don't get the sense that Ableton is likely to go native multi-channel anytime soon. It just doesn't seem.
My feeling is that things like Envelop might actually be counterproductive in that, because they can always say, well, you can do it anyway with Max, right?
Yeah, there's a few other. I think there's some spat tools now in Max as well, and same kind of thing. But yeah, they all.
Well,
I
I think yours is the only one that actually does this routing trick, right? Everything else kind of splits it up into stereo pairs, and then you have to kind of work with those stereo pairs.
Yeah, a lot of them have each panner kind of output straight to the hardware in pairs, but they'll usually have some utility where you can say sort of like copy these routing settings to every instance or something like that. So yeah, I think we're the only one that routes ambisonics within Live, but again, yeah, I think part of the reason for that is because it's sort of hacky. It's kind of I think it's we did our original version actually didn't do it that way. The first version of E4L, which was mostly built by this guy, Rama Gottfried, who was at Cinemat at Berkeley at the time. I think he's now at ICST. And it did it more that other approach where we had there was a separate program running in standalone Max, and it worked more on this model of you bus all your stems over to that separate program, and you also send it the metadata instruction. This is like the other classic model and sort of the SPAT model, is you have some other encoding program, and you're sending all these azimuth and elevation values. So we did that first. And I think it was with Live 10 that we sort of figured out that the API could do it, the Max for Live, that you could do it in this other way with Ableton. And I think that was where, for me, with my artist hat on, I was like, that is just so much more of a pleasant workflow than this whole, firing up multiple programs, making sure everything's synced between the two, and just all the stress that comes with that, especially if you're going to do it in a live context, and that's the number of things that can go wrong. So, but yeah, no, it's interesting you say that it's counterproductive in a way, because I think you're probably right about that, and I probably do feel in some way that sometimes it does seem like Ableton perhaps sort of leans on that. You can do it with Max thing. In situations where, yes, that's true, but also it could be done super elegantly natively if it was implemented right.
That is correct. That is correct.
Yeah, the toughest one for me is still just the LFO, like just having to slam a whole device on to do a Max for Live LFO just to get one knob in some other device running on a sine wave is just I'm holding. Although I think they've improved this in Live. I think I saw something that Live 12 is tweaking something about that, perhaps. So we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. I don't have access to Live 12 yet. So I requested beta access, but I did it a little too late, and then kind of I got kind of very far down the queue, so I don't have access yet. But kind of that brings me to one thing that I'm already seeing people kind of hammering away in the comment section. Why not Reaper, right? I mean, it's sort of why Ableton? What was the reason you guys chose Ableton?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was just because of Max for Live and just the ease of development there, and the fact that a bunch of these tools and ambisonics libraries already existed in Max. Max is obviously very popular in the academic setting and context, and that's where most of the ambisonics, well, a lot of it was happening in academia more than in sort of commercial music industry. So I think kind of just grew out of that. A lot of us on the team are into electronic music and already working in Ableton for that reason. We would love to support other DAWs, but it's just going and repackaging all this stuff up as VSTs is just kind of beyond the scope of. And then honestly, I kind of look at it, and it's sort of in that context, I do think, well, look, like Reaper does have native multi-channel support. You can use the IEM VSTs in there, and that's good software as well. So I do think they're different. I like the UX of Envelop is a little bit different, I think, with that kind of Ableton look and feel, and this real focus on simplicity. Well, controls, but you're
adding something that you can do in a DAW that can't do it any other way, and so that slot's filled. Whereas, if you kind of repackaged it maybe into a VST or even something like Feedler Audio doing, where they're kind of grabbing the audio from the memory rather than through the DAW itself. Are you creating something new, or are you just kind of replicating what could be done just in another format? So It's always tricky.
I mean, the one thing that always brings me back to Ableton is sort of the non-linear workflow that you have in Ableton. That I think kind of a couple of other DAWs have tried that, but I have not yet found anything that I find as appealing. I mean, it could be that I started out with Ableton. Kind of that's always kind of your first DAW is always the one that you gravitate towards. But I always felt that there's something. I'm honestly kind of longing for a DAW that has the usability of Ableton in its non-linear workflow, and at the same time, as you say, sort of a full multi-channel support. That's not really happening right now, right?
Yeah, I'd be curious if it's on Bitwig's radar at all.
I haven't heard anything, but when you look at because they've got their new format, which their kind of session format, project format, you can save to, I think it's called DAW project or Open DAW, I think it's called, which is an XML file basically. So you can actually get an idea of how the API is working in a way, looking at that. Because you can now transfer files to Studio One from Bitwig or from Studio One back to Bitwig. Well, obviously, Studio One is multi-channel, so that might mean something changes there. But when you look at the XML, you can see that each track has a parameter of channel number. And obviously, it's always set to 2 when it's coming from Bitwig. But that kind of made me think, maybe it might just be that it's just they've got to say how many channels there are, and there are only 2 channels. But it might also mean that there's capacity for more. But who knows?
Yeah, I got very excited when Pro Tools did the Pro Tools Sketch, because for a second I thought, well, maybe that's it. But no, Pro Tools Sketch is a huge letdown.
I think things probably can get quite complex, like in a multi-channel sense, with a non-linear DAW as well, because you see some issues. But
even things like Digital Performer, for example, who is multi-channel and had this kind of non-linear workflow added in I think it was it the version 10? I'm not quite sure. It's also kind of an afterthought. It's kind of interesting that nobody kind of moved into that. So either kind of a DAW that has a solid multi-channel workflow needs to kind of add this non-linear editing capabilities, or Ableton kind of needs to add multi-channel. But one of the two things I hope will happen soon.
There's a cool use case with the non-linear mode, and which I actually haven't done a ton, but one of the cool things that it enables is you could put your panners in session mode in Ableton on a different track than your actual audio stems or devices. And one thing you can do is create loops in the sort of session clips that have automation for different motions and things. So you can imagine having your just sort of grid where you can trigger the way sounds are moving and loop that motion separately from choosing which audio, what drum loop is. So it creates you can make these really cool matrices of possibilities.
Well, that's where DAWs like Bitwig and FL Studio and Ableton, there's the modulation capability is where they're not a DAW to just record you playing a piano in MIDI and then playing it back with some effects on it. That's not really how people use them. It's much more dynamic than that. That's probably coming on to what we were talking about earlier is those modulation possibilities into multi-channel or immersive audio is pretty exciting. Could be.
But that's what you said there is really interesting. I never thought about that you could actually kind of utilize it that way. Kind of there are so many. I think there are so many possibilities out there that people haven't really looked at yet. Especially also when it comes to Envelop. I'm actually getting good in pronouncing that. So kind of you guys were quiet for quite some time. And then essentially you just released a new kind of update. So what's new in that update?
Yeah, a lot of that was probably because I had 2 kids in the past 4 years. So
congratulations, right?
Yes, thank you. But it's not great for the software. But no, it just took ages. But we find that the main thing was getting Apple Silicon support finally. Most of which was my fault. Some of that was waiting for the libraries that we depend upon to all update themselves. Since it's kind of an all or nothing thing, you need all your dependencies in. But so that was the big thing. A few bug fixes and stuff. We added some new decoders for some of the newer Dolby and Auro 3D layouts. and some better, a little tool to have just visual metering on the decoder outputs. A big one that people have been asking for, which we haven't talked about a ton, but is adding an aux send and receive. A lot of people have, myself included, understandably wanted this to be ability to have sort of submixes or buses in the ambisonics domain to share reverbs or to put a head tracker on a group of things, or even just, gain staging is easy enough to do otherwise, but any sort of processing. So that's a big one that we'll probably lean into a bit more, as well as one new. We added a sort of multi-panner device that I'd kind of realized that a common use case is people just have loads of stereo stems and they're just panning each of them. And sometimes it is easier to just have this one multi-panner device on one track where you send the outputs of 6-8 channels or something all into that, and then can spatialize them as a group with relative offsets and things. I find that works especially well for like percussion mixes where you got a load of drum sounds and you want to sort of place them, spread them out, but then maybe twist them as a group or lift them up as a group, stuff like that. Mostly sort of fairly utilitarian updates this time around. But a couple of those, unlock some significant new possibilities.
Yeah, kind of especially the routing was something that actually kind of I think I already used. I'm not quite sure if that video is already online. I did a number of videos for the winter break, but that one is I think already online where I used that because it, as you say, kind of you can use that for all kinds of things. And the way I used it was for a bus, essentially a reverb bus. That's what I used it for. And that was actually kind of
that's the huge use case that I think so many people want that. It's such a natural workflow.
And kind of I think I also kind of pushed it a little bit to the limit, because what I did is I routed out of a group. So essentially I grouped a couple of devices and then routed out of a group into that aux receive kind of device. And that is a little kind of Max tends to get confused if I messed around too much.
There is an issue with groups too. We'll have a new release coming out soon-ish, probably early in the new year, with some bug fixes for these. And this is kind of why I say I don't even love the way I'm doing things as the developer of the software, because it just gets really fiddly. Doing all this routing magic when you've already got instrument racks and groups and like the Ableton. I mean, the Ableton model for that is pretty clean with chains and everything, but it does get to be just a lot of internal bookkeeping.
But kind of it works well. And if you guys use that for live performances, it has the stability obviously that it needs. Does it happen once in a while that it breaks during a live performance?
It's been a while since I don't think we have. Most of the stuff we're doing, especially the listening events and things, tend to be prepared sets. So they're well tried and rehearsed before the time they get run there. I think it's been fine.
I always found trying to do stuff live, you only really ran into trouble where your CPU was just hitting max too frequently, or it's just, or something changed in between practicing and then trying to do it live in the, I don't know, maybe tweaked a parameter on a plugin, and that's all it took to tip it over the edge. This is a few years ago where CPU was more of an issue, but that tended to be the stability issue, was just getting enough power rather than
that's true,
rather than the process itself.
We had issues at one point. We tried to use AVB at some point to just in a sort of live pop-up event context, just to Ethernet cables only, and I remember that did not go great. It sort of mostly worked, but would just get into sort of hiccuping at some point. I would love to try that again now. It's been quite a few. This was probably at least 4 years ago or something, so I bet it's improved a lot since. That would be, I would love to, it would be amazing if we got to a point where just an Ethernet cable from a laptop in the middle of the room was all you needed, and off to the races.
For video as well. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah, there's been quite a lot of development on kind of sharing audio as musicians, but not so much in terms of syncing all that live and to video as well, that's all still a bit either very, very expensive or very disjointed. So
yeah. One, I should mention on that note, actually, one thing that was added in this latest release, there is this protocol called ADM. Have you guys heard of the audio data model? And they have an OSC version of the ADM OSC that's been adopted by quite a few people actually now for packaging metadata about the position of sound objects. So SPAT supports it, L Acoustics support it with their ESA system. There's actually quite a long list. D&B, like I think a number of sort of smart amplifiers and things. So that's made me kind of optimistic. I was excited to see it. It doesn't do a ton. It's basically just a standardized OSC protocol for packaging the angles. But I was feeling excited just seeing, a bunch of companies are deciding to share an OSC. It's just a good sign for more stability and interoperability probably coming down the pipe.
Would that be it? That's not a lot. That'd be more a playback kind of sense, would it? Or would it be used live?
Yeah.
Could it be used live or?
Well, with E4L, it's not really relevant because E4L is doing the encoding and decoding. It's sort of, I think it was designed more for broadcast scenarios where audio is being sourced from one place and they want to specify the positional metadata, but somebody somewhere else is doing the actual encoding or speaker management type of stuff. But I think it could be another thing I'll just bring up and mention is, so I also work on LED software, sort of 3D LED thing. And so I've started using that protocol for that, where in our San Francisco venue for Envelop, for instance, we also have a load of LEDs in those columns. So we send all that, we sort of relay all the sound object metadata over to the lighting software as well, so it can know how many sound sources where are they in the space, give me a basic metering on them at the moment, that kind of thing. So that's something that I hope that that like shared OSC protocol, you could imagine that showing up in a bunch more sort of VJ softwares or different things like that.
Yeah, no, cool. Yeah, I've heard of it. I didn't really look into it or think of it in that sort of sense. So I think in the back of my mind, I was just thinking, ADM, like BWFs or whatever. It's kind of like the same thing, just with some OSC on it, but it sounds like a little bit more than that. So yeah, no, cool. Brilliant.
Yeah, you always had kind of this additional option of controlling the lights, right? So this was always something that was part of the initial kind of design of the system, I would think, right?
Yeah, no, it is, and the change there is really just sort of gradually turning from a one-off implementation to something that is hopefully trending towards sort of standardized in some sense, but.
Cool. If you kind of, I'm curious. What are the things that you think would come next? What are the things that you think that are missing in your system?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. I think it would. I don't know that we'll actually do this. I do think we're one of we don't have lots of sort of advanced or experimental effects. That's one direction we could go doing more. We have a couple sort of things like the Boyd's based delay. It would be great if we could just package up a load more convolutions for the reverb, just because those aren't really easy to, most people don't have loads of ambisonics convolutions sitting around. But one that I'm excited about, just because I want to use it, is to make like a polyphonic engine for either samplers or voices synthesizers. Because I have found that, often when working with this stuff, you just end up taking loads of stereo content and up mixing it. And I've always wanted to do, if I'm playing piano or big chords, I would love for the voices to even subtly or extremely move around independently. And you can kind of do that today, but it's just so tedious. You sort of, have n instances of the same synth plugin and break them across different tracks and have all these extra panners. So I might put some time into messing around with that. I'm still mulling on. It would be amazing if there was some standard that emerged for that. I would love to see if within VST or something there emerged some kind of standard for plugins to have multi-channel output for independent voices, so that any polyphonic sampler or synth I'm using rather than down mixing to stereo at the VST level, just spits out a load of voices. Because I could see that being super fun to then spatialize that and get into more the subtle algorithmic panning rather than the whole one master LFO or manually draw my automation. Just have sort of different little ways that those voices move around. And that ties back to, one that you mentioned, Rolly. I just got my hands on an Osmos, which I'm really excited to dig into for this kind of reason, where I'm like, oh, MPE seems really cool combined with spatial, where you can imagine, okay, each note.
No,
And
MPE,
MPE, I think, is a cool way to potentially control that without without having to do this mega tedious loads of automation editing, doing things voice by voice.
Nice. Because you can, as long as you can map each expression to what you want it to do in a spatial sense, you can expressly play the instrument into the space, which is how I see it. It's like, if I'm gonna slide my fingers up, I'm talking about a Rolly keyboard now, but if I slide my fingers up the keys as I'm playing a chord, that will lift up in the room and stuff like that. Or if I put a vibrato on it or something, it's going to shake it left and right a little bit or whatever. So that's definitely where things can go. And something that I wish it's got quite a new feature in Bitwig called voice stacking, which is like unison on any synth with a unison, which is basically just two voices slightly pitched to give it kind of that depth. Voice stacking is just taking that to like 16 unisons basically. But then, because of obviously it's same as in Ableton, you can modulate each of those voice stacks differently. So each oscillator essentially is expressed slightly differently. I thought, if you've got say 8 slightly different voices from each other, you spread those into different parts of the room, you've kind of got one synth which is cohesive in terms of you'd recognize it as a synth pad or whatever, and it would sound like it in the room, but you'd have this kind of expressive control of where each stack goes. That would be so cool, but it's not possible to get. It all comes out just as stereo, so you can't get at each voice stack, stuff like that. It's just same as you trying to bend Ableton into this multi-channel thing. It's the same sort of thing. You just can't get at the stuff to get it to where you want it to go sometimes. But that'd be that's kind of, it's kind of happened with the Sound Particles synth, the 3D
Skydust.
What do they call it?
Skydust.
Skydust, yeah. It's kind of, that's going there, and because you can map the MPE to the parameters of the synth, you've got a little bit of that sort of control. So that's pretty cool. But so much more that could be done. It's still very, I think it's because everything's just such a stereo locked kind of workflow, or it's coming from a stereo locked workflow. It's kind of, that's just tagging on spatial, as a bit like what Audio was saying. It just because you've put a mono or stereo sound into a space doesn't make it immersive. That only makes it spatial. Whereas if you can express things all around you from the instrument itself, that's just that's definitely the next level without having to go through all these workarounds.
Skydust is an interesting one, isn't it? It's just, I think kind of sometimes there's also a little bit of a disadvantage of being the first mover, because not a lot of people really knew how to kind of work that synth, and unfortunately it's not as straightforward, right? So kind of for most people who are kind of in the stereo domain, they kind of looked at Skydust and didn't really know what to do with it. And then essentially said, well, it doesn't sound good, and the reason it doesn't sound good is because it takes a little bit of effort to actually kind of make things sound. It's not like all these synths that have been around for quite some time, but just kind of to use one finger and then kind of everything plays automatically. So you actually need to kind of put effort into it, right?
Yeah, it's probably quite difficult to get. I mean, a lot of synths are just kind of like a couple of oscillators at heart, so it must be quite difficult to, how do you get those just two sort of sound sources spread into a room without completely mangling it? Is quite, because we're used to the power of stereo is that it's this kind of artificial, well, for me, I always think it's not really the real sound of anything. It's an artificial kind of image and an artificial condensed power because it's all being compressed down into these two speakers, and that's quite difficult to move outwards into multi-channel. I always think it's kind of I know you can emulate it with kind of multi-channel compression and stuff, but
that's an argument that I hear quite often these days, that sort of the stereo kind of audio is actually the most unnatural way to listen to audio, right? That's an interesting argument.
I think if you think about what if all we were doing as engineers was recreating a production of music being played, all you would do is press record, write it and publish it, and then export it, and somebody would hear it exactly as it was played. But all of that stereo processing is synthesizing what was played naturally and getting it out, hopefully a better sounding way than what it was recorded. For a lot, I'm not talking about classical. That's a different kind of side. I'm talking purely electronic music. You're taking things out of reality, but because of that tight control of only two channels, I think that is kind of its attraction as well. Is that in comparison to multi-channel and spatial audio, that's its attraction, is that you've got this condensed power in one place, whereas it's difficult to do it in spatial audio. Spatial audio is very good for like more ambient stuff or to recreate the sound of a room or something like that, but it's not so good at, I guess what Mark's also getting at is getting this expression and this kind of unreality into the room. That's what as an electronic music fan, that's how I'm excited about it, rather than just the spatial sense anyway.
One thing I found really counterintuitive artistically when working with spatial audio is that actually the number of, you would think you've got this more space, surely you're going to be able to cram more sounds in or have more things working together because you've got this huge space for it. But I actually find that often you really got to do less is more with spatial, and that with stereo music you can make this crazy intricate detailed stuff. I'm thinking of like sort of Max Cooper type of stuff, loads of intricate micro details, and it kind of works. And I've often found that if you then go try to do that with spatial audio, it is just totally overwhelming because you're just so in this real physical environment. So, oh my God, what's going on in here? It's so it's crazy. And often having fewer elements is what opens up this different kind of experience where you're feel what's going on in the space. So it's it's really interesting. I think what you're saying is just the translation from stereo workflow often seems sort of like technically clear, but in terms of what makes sense content-wise or artistically, sometimes it's just like, oh, this is a left turn. Actually, you just got to go do something different. Relating to the tools, it's interesting though, because that's the other place I'm optimistic about ambisonics and stuff is listening on headphones in the sort of VR and video game context where it has, or the 3D video platforms that have mostly settled upon ambisonics. So it's a really interesting, I think there's kind of two things going on at once there that are related technologically, because I'm excited about that because it means the tool chains for ambisonics will have reason to be invested in and reason to be worked on. But it still does feel like there's a weird chicken and egg left where sort of, okay, but the headset experience is fundamentally still a headphone experience. What's going to be the best there may or may not be actually really cool in real world immersive systems. But it's kind of it's the best we've got. That I mean, it's definitely what's pushing stuff forward, probably more than anything else at the moment.
Well, that was what Audio Brewer's phaser. That I know it's a traditional type of effect, but the way he was describing it, that it was only possible to get that phaser into a spatial sense was through use of ambisonics. So that was, I think that's kind of a area that's going to get explored more, is actually using the like the ambisonics kind of mathematics itself more as a way to generate the different sound as well. So that could be quite interesting. I don't really understand how he did it, but it's a pretty cool phaser, considering it is only a phaser which is as old as music itself almost. So
yeah, that's
pretty cool.
that's a cool one. Kind of there were two things that kind of that connected with me. The first one that you Mark, the first that you said that sometimes less is more. And that was also something that I noticed. I was teaching an ambisonics actually a couple of years ago. I was teaching a class about ambisonics, and it was kind of one of those special topics classes. I had a couple of students in there, and we had like a makeshift ambisonics system set up. And what the students produced was significantly better if they kind of just had a couple of components that they would kind of move around. It was a lot more impressive and a lot more immersive. And normally you would think kind of if you have all things around you, then kind of you're more immersed, but that was not the case essentially. If you had a couple of components that you strategically kind of position, it's a lot more immersive, and that was very interesting to me. That's actually happening. So kind of yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think it's probably coming back to the nature, and you would only hear things from one direction. So the less you've got coming from different directions is gonna feel more, or your brain is gonna be more aware to that. Once it's everything around you, is it really much different from just putting it all into stereo kind of thing? So I don't know. It's a balancing act, definitely.
Yeah. So having sort of a synth engine in Envelop would actually, I think, and to be perfectly honest, one of the things that also is beneficial for you guys is the fact that because of the technology, you're somewhat limited in what you can do, right? I mean, there's a limited number of components that you have, and sometimes if you are really limited in the devices that you have, that really being in a design college, this is a trick that we sometimes use, that you restrict essentially the number of tools that you have in order to increase the level of creativity. And I think kind of having a tool like that in Envelop might actually be more successful than Sound Particles ended up being with their synths, because you're just kind of really restricted and limited to the things that are there, and then you can really kind of explore how to use that in the best possible way. So that would be really cool.
Yeah, I hugely agree with that as an artist. I talk about that with artist friends all the time, that just constraints are so crucial to do it. You got to just define the box and then go figure out everything to be done in that box. But when there's no box, it is happiness does not ensue.
You get lost in these things.
Where am I? What am I doing? But I would love to throw the question just back to the two of you in terms of what's next. Having spent time with Envelop and using these different ways, are there any obvious holes that you see, or something on your wish list, or a direction that seems clearly valuable?
Well, the one thing that I always wondered, and kind of this is actually kind of where we would actually break that box. One thing that I always wondered is that if I'm doing something with Envelop, then the limitations are limitations, then they sometimes are a little bit severe, right? So kind of there are certain things that you would like to do. You would like to have a phaser, you would like to have these types of things, and you can't really, even the reverb, right? So you're limited to the convolution reverb, which is a first order convolution reverb. So my thing, and I'm honestly not even sure if that's even possible, sort of a way to bring external plugins into the system. And kind of my original understanding was that that's not possible because Max for Life, I think, has that restriction. But then that's sort of what brings me back to the Valhalla kind of thing that we started at the beginning. Then I see these Max for Life devices that are essentially wrappers for plugins. So somehow this seems to be possible. So is this something that you guys are thinking of? Is there some possibility that will ever happen? Is this even technically possible? I don't know.
It's definitely technically possible. You can, within Max, it is very easy actually to just embed a VST plugin. It's hard to distribute because you can't sort of, unless you have the rights to that plugin. So like it's not great from presenting it as a product to end users, but it's very easy technically to do. The easiest way is that way, and it's literally within Max. It's just like VST and then the name of the plugin, and it'll expose the inputs and outputs of that plugin. So if it is a plugin that works in the ambisonics domain, that's not too bad. There's another, but but that would be sort of one-off on a plugin by plugin basis. But very doable. Possibly could be done more generically over time. The other very clunky way, and there's some other tools that have done this, is you can set up loads of dummy tracks in Ableton that you just sort of use as little routers where, you can do that audio from, and then you can pick some other plugin and say, I want output 7 and 8 of this thing. So you can horribly tediously go and set up a lot of these dummy tracks and grab stuff and get it to go where you want it to go. But it is not reasonable from a workflow perspective. But yeah, that is where, I mean, short of Ableton, because that's what's nice in Reaper, actual multi-channel DAW, is you can just have a chain of Ambisonics domain plugins and it all goes straight through and it just looks normal. We're always keeping an eye on, I mean, as new major versions come out, I always sort of check like, is there some new, are there any plumbing changes here that make something either, but there's usually not. But that would be, I mean, that's part of the hope with open source, but realistically, I don't expect people to come along and invest loads of time in developing professional grade Envelop plugins because it's sort of such a boutique specialist, but it's Ableton only, and you got to build it in Max. So it's kind of, it's a bit particular. So yeah, as you say, that's kind of its blessing and its curse. But it is a good idea. Yeah, I should look at, like we did embed the IEM binaural decoder because we prefer that to the binaural decoders that we had. It depends upon the user having independently installed it. So it's not great for new users because they just get a red error box saying you haven't installed this other thing.
I didn't know that.
It's just I could talk to them about if they were okay with us like repackaging and redistribute, but then you get into this, this is a whole separate domain of logistical problem.
Yeah.
But no, that is something I have been interested in over time, that I kind of expect that the scope of how many Ambisonics domain VST plugins are out there in the world will just kind of keep creeping over time. And as that happens, building the plumbing to make it easier to hook them all up.
Yeah, especially things like the audio brewer stuff, and kind of we keep coming back to that because that I think was a major thing. The phaser that sort of is so creative and you can do so much things with it. Having that in the Envelop system would be a really cool thing. Yeah.
I'm gonna go look at that after this too, and then I'm reminded you guys were talking about Valhalla earlier. I think if I don't have this mixed up, I think the guy who writes the Valhalla plugins has actually published some Ambisonic papers or has done I think he's done either some research or a similar thing where he sort of used it as an intermediary step within producing stereo output, but using it in a like processing chain to sort of simulate.
I'm sure audio brewers weren't the first to be using Ambisonics even to create stereo, effects. So that whole mathematical side of it.
It's exactly that.
Kind of makes sense.
Right. It is a natural, whether you're doing spatial or not, it's just a natural signal processing trick. So
yeah.
Now kind of coming to and essentially the being open source allows other people to contribute, and there are a couple of people who really are passionate about it. So I kind of, that I like to use a lot kind of the modified master bus device that has the internal head tracking, and I think you have talked to Noah on our Discord server. Is this something that you like?
And honestly,
people
we should integrate that into. We should probably just integrate that into the main one because that is a very common use case. A lot of people want that. We should probably just do it.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of curious if somebody develops a kind of a custom device. How do you like people to approach that? Do you want them to kind of just do that, or is this something where they should reach out to you? Kind of how is the preferred process?
I mean, we're totally happy for them to just go do it, and then let us know about it too. We have right now we're mostly on a Facebook group. There's an Envelop for Live I forget the full name, users and developers group. So which is sort of it has a little bit. People do post stuff in there from time to time, but we're very happy for people to just go mess around with stuff and then send it to us. I will say the software engineering, this is another place where using Macs is a bit frustrating because it is a really bad programming language for like collaboration or being able to comprehend other people's work. With text-based programming languages, you have these diffs and you can see exactly what was changed and which lines were touched and what's going on here. One of the challenges working with people in Macs is just like, oh, jumble of spaghetti turned into different jumble of spaghetti. Like, what did you touch in here? And it's like, I'm not even sure what I touched. I know I touched some stuff around this bit, but short of like looking at two screenshots side by side, it's all so it. I think that is in practice, it becomes a sort of unfortunate obstacle to kind of just keeping track of like, okay, is this thing like super stable or is there a load of crazy changes in this or what's going on? So it makes it tough in practice to have a lot of people touching the same stuff at once. But no, in principle, the stuff's open source for a reason. We totally want stuff like what Noah did is great because we're super happy about that. Just awesome. He's gone and done it and he's posted it and people who wanted that can just go grab it and it works. It's definitely great when that happens. So we're all for it.
I'm one thing that I'm also curious, and Sam and I had this discussion kind of earlier today because Sam didn't know that Envelop actually kind of worked for Windows, and Sam is a Windows user. I'm more of a kind of
sorry,
whatever is kind of working for me, so I'm using both. I always found it works actually quite well for Windows, but on your site you kind of say it is only Mac supported. Is this because
there were just we could never figure it out. It was some people just would get these random crashes. It didn't seem to be on all Windows systems. We sent crash reports and things to Ableton, and we kind of just like threw our hands up at some point and just said we should just put a warning and tell like, we don't want people losing work and, putting hours in and stuff just breaks. Yeah. So, but it does, as you said, it mostly and usually does just work fine. And in theory, it should just work fine because it is Macs for Live and Macs is cross-platform in that sense. But of course, we all know, things being cross-platform doesn't mean they don't just crash sometimes somewhere. But at this point, I would say I think it does mostly work and should generally be pretty stable and totally fine on Windows. But we just there was enough random stuff that we never were able to get, or we just could never really figure out what was where, even like what subcomponent it was really coming from. So it was sort of a goose chase that we gave up on at some point, unfortunately. But
it's sort of my experience with Ableton and Windows is that the Macs implementation is not as stable as you say as the implementation on a Mac operating system. It also, quite frankly, takes a lot of time to boot up and kind of to get started. That's probably it. So if anybody out there kind of wants to use this software on Windows, they can. Right?
I always tell people go for it and just hit save all the time and do save as backups of your work. These are good. This is good advice for practice all the time. Those are just great habits as a human in the world in this point. So.
So we're starting to come close to to our allocated time. There are essentially kind of two things I wanted to touch towards the end. And the first thing is, if somebody, and to some extent we already talked about that, but if somebody wants to contribute, is the best way to reach out to you? Kind of how to
the Facebook group or info is on the website, envelop.us. Loads of info there. I will pitch right now. We are in our winter fundraiser at the moment. We have a membership program and take donations as a nonprofit, all tax deductible for people in the US. So envelop.us/memberships has info on that. People in the Bay Area, there's perks related to that for coming to real events, but otherwise also sort of access to streaming stuff. But envelop.us is the place to go. Everything is on there. Email addresses to send things in, whether it's content or asking about events. We do also some private and custom events in Bay Area if people are interested in that, bringing in their own material or just hosting a social event. So there's lots of avenues.
And there's also kind of, you already mentioned that. That was actually the one thing that I thought kind of I mentioned towards the end is your membership program. So you can actually you out there, you can become a member of the Envelop group. So what are the perks if somebody becomes a member?
Yeah, if you're local, there's you get some tickets to come to local events. We've also been rolling out some during the pandemic. We a whole separate thing built a web-based streaming a platform called Envelop Stream that ships ambisonics into a browser where it can be decoded. Either sent out to speakers if you have a multi-channel setup, or speakers. So we're rolling out more features related to that. So membership will also include access to a bunch of streaming events and online Envelop Stream stuff. And then also it's just, it's helping support the nonprofit. We are, a small organization with a relatively small number of events and revenue. So a huge part of it is just, supporting what we do.
So
is that to the Sennheiser soundbar, did you say?
No, so that it could go to anything. Yeah, it comes
okay.
into the browser. It sends 16 third order ambisonics, 16 channels into the browser, and then through sort of Chrome or whatever. If you have a HDMI soundbar or something like that, it can ship
take
to
it
that.
to the right. Sorry. Okay.
Yep. Or it will just do a local headphone binaural decode. If you just plugged in on headphones.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. I didn't hear. I thought I heard the word Sennheiser. I didn't know if it was
a
only a Sennheiser thing.
It should work with any like standard HDMI compatible bar. But
right. Yeah. Thank you.
And the membership, I think, is currently $120 per year, and
$120 per year.
Yeah, and you can get all the information by going to the website. I think it's a worthwhile cause. If you're interested in spatial audio, then definitely that's something that you should consider. Now, kind of at the very end, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that you didn't touch?
I don't think so. Yeah, this was pretty great. My adjacent pitch is that I will be finally getting a commercial release at the door next year of my LED software, which will be called Chromatic. Nice. That also is spatial aware. A big part of that is features to interoperate with spatial audio platforms to do sort of volumetric renderings of that. So
that sort of is also how are people going to learn about that? Is this also something that they can learn on the Envelop?
We will update. Yeah, it is on my to-do list to get Envelop ported over to the new version of all that software. So at some point that will be more info about that will be available there. The website doesn't quite exist. It's chromatic.co.
Chromatic.co. Okay.
Chromatic with a K at the end. This shows how much I've thought about the marketing and communicability of this. CHROMATIK.
Okay, so there's CH at the beginning and the K in the end. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
It's mildly German or Austrian feeling.
It starts out English and ends up German. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Sam, any final famous last words?
Well, obviously have a great Christmas because I guess this is the last one before New Year.
Yeah.
In terms of the podcast, the only thing it's kind of my New Year's wish is that I think at some point we're going to get some kind of way to model the room that you're in, kind of binaurally, but with the actual room, coming back to GPU son kind of processing of audio with that kind of number of cores, I think is going to make that possible. So that's my New Year's hope is something like that. So that's where I'll leave it. Yeah,
that's an interesting one. So
rather than using an algorithm-based kind of binauralizing, you will kind of almost model the room in a more of a physical sense to create that, or possibly even where the speakers are in your room. But like the Smythe Realizer is a kind of
exactly
on that.
It's
not a GPU set thing, but it's that concept of you match the environment that you're listening in to what comes into your headphones, because it's that visual relationship is the key to binaural being believable. So that's my hope. Anyway, I don't know why I said that, but I thought I'd squeeze it in.
Well, that's a good one. Kind of, Mark, any wishes for 2024 since we're already kind of at that stage?
No, yeah, just looking forward to more time to work on all this stuff, honestly. And yeah, finally, I would just say it's been so nice to finally be in touch because yeah, we've been sort of vaguely aware of. Well, we're not aware for a while at all of your videos, then became aware of them, and for some reason, neither of us reached out. But I just huge appreciation for all the time and support you've put into the project. So it's great to actually connect and chat about it.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks very much. Kind of, I had a lot of fun today, and I hope you guys out there also kind of had a lot of fun. And with that, I think everything that was supposed to be said has been said. Kind of happy holidays and kind of very nice start in the year 2024. And the Spatial Audio Monthly podcast is going to see you again in the second half of January 2024. See you, everybody.
Happy holidays.